Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to talk to everyday superheroes helping nonprofits using technology. Today I'm joined by guest Mitch Stein, who is the co-founder and CEO of Pond, which is a networking and RFP platform for nonprofits. Mitch, welcome to the show.
Hey, Alex, thanks for having me.
So I did a brief introduction, but maybe you can expand a bit about that. What is it that you do and how do you spend your day most of the time?
Yeah, the second part is hard to answer because it does vary a lot day by day. But yeah, my name is Mitch Stein. I am the co-founder and CEO of a company called Pond. Our website's joinpond.com. We are the place where nonprofit leaders thrive. We try to connect everybody with the right tools, services, resources at the right time, saving people in the impact space time, money, and just making sure that they're having the most impact possible. We do this with a marketplace approach, meaning we bring together vendors of products and services and trainings that folks that work in the nonprofit space need and use every day, and help match people with the right solutions based on the problems they share and make a really efficient private platform for them to find and connect with the right vendors. So we have been working on this for a little over 2.5 years, really fine-tuning what does it mean to connect nonprofit leaders with the right solutions? How does a marketplace for the nonprofit sector work? We've got lots of comparisons out there in other parts of our life, and there really is nothing out there for the nonprofit sector. We go to Carvana for cars, we go to Facebook Marketplace maybe to find furniture and things around us. Like there's all these examples we use every day. And it's just been interesting. People often don't intuitively, when you say it's a marketplace for nonprofits, they don't necessarily know what that means right away because it's never existed. So we kind of get to define that every day, which is exciting, challenging, and something for us always to improve.
So to be transparent, I'm actually a vendor, I think they're called, or a provider on Pond. And this is one reason why I asked you to be on the podcast is because I think there's a lot of benefits that nonprofits can leverage from the platform. And it must be very challenging to be the first to market. Like you said, if there's all these other different platforms, we already know what they do. There's, I guess, an educational part to say, and it's a promotional and educational part to say, look, here's what Pond can do for you. How does that work for you?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah. I mean, from a startup founder perspective, and I've been in, an accelerator with a bunch of other founders, and a lot of the vendors on the platform are also tech startup founders themselves. So, I talk with startups and founders all the time. And there's this double-edged sword of we didn't make a better fundraising platform, right? And that's something when you say, hey, do you need a fundraising platform? You've used one before. Here's a potentially better version. Let's talk. So it's easy for people to understand, but really, really crowded space. So you have this trade-off where if you're kind of defining your own product in your own space, and you're the first one to do it, it's a little bit harder for people to grasp or understand necessarily when or how I would use it if I haven't before. But you also don't have competition you're fighting against. You're kind of defining your own path. And that's honestly what I love about the structure of the type of company we have, because that's always just been who I am, as someone that brings people together and wants to share resources, good news, just connecting people. And I can kind of infuse that into a product. It's a really, really cool way to bring that part of me to life in a lot of ways, and just making the most of it, and always also having faith in the long term potential outcome, where the beauty of marketplaces is that once they reach that, we call it critical velocity or critical mass, they do start to kind of naturally expand and have this benefit just from the audience, and we've seen a lot of that exciting growth in the past few weeks. That feels like we're in that direction, but it's still very much in those early startup days of finding exactly what our path's going to be.
Taking a step back for a second, what inspired you to create Pond?
Yeah, I have a history as an investment banker. So a lot of people look just at my resume or something on LinkedIn and they're like, what happened here? You used to work at Goldman Sachs for 7 years. How did this get started? And, outside of work, in my quote unquote free time, which there wasn't a ton of, I was really involved in the nonprofit space. So there's an organization in New York City called the LGBT Center. I'm on the board there. I've been a major fundraiser for them for the past 7 years on their major event, the Northeast AIDS Ride. So my dad and I joined that event in 2016, I had an uncle who we lost to AIDS, and someone had brought it up to me, and I told my dad about it, and he really wanted to participate as well. And that first event, both the fundraising being beyond our wildest expectations, we've raised over $400,000 in the last 6 years for the cause, which I never saw coming, but it became just this like huge passion project. And before I knew it, I was doing all of those things that so many people in nonprofits and fundraisers are doing. I'm crafting email marketing campaigns, using a fundraising platform, like stewarding my donors and managing their info in my own spreadsheets, these things that we see at early stage nonprofits. But I also got that firsthand experience of like the magic created by so many of these organizations, the community around the events that they run, and just how special the organization, the cause, and the mission of ending AIDS and supporting the LGBT community was to so many people. And feeling that firsthand, I just knew there was something out there more fulfilling and impactful with my own time to be done than being a banker. And so I spent a lot of time figuring out what those next moves could be. Did I want to go work in the space? But at the time, I was covering the technology sector as a banker, working with a lot of software companies, internet businesses, online marketplaces. And that's where I kind of got this inspiration of like, well, wait a second. There are a lot of people complain about different problems in the sector, especially around technology and under adoption of great tools and products. And either they're too expensive, or people don't know which ones to use, or they're using outdated products, et cetera, or maybe they're getting like sold something they shouldn't be using, all these issues. And I'm like, well, if you had just a well-running, transparent marketplace where people knew what are the options in this category in my need area, what are other people succeeding with, what are the outcomes that they're having? Like, is there a way that we can bring all of that online? And I started talking to people and trying to figure out if there was something similar. And what I found was, as I was doing some of these like early user interviews, that people were like, I ask, how do you find the current platform you're using or a vendor that you use? And they're always just like, oh, it was such a nightmare. I had to ask a bunch of people and I didn't know who to trust. And there's all these complaints about the processes. And then I was like, oh, well, like, where did you look online? And people were just like, oh, well, I can't trust anything I find online. Like maybe a Facebook group, I'll post a question and get some feedback there. And it's like, oh, wow, this entire industry, which is enormous, is by and large happening in an offline, pretty localized fashion. And especially during the pandemic, it became so clear, like, oh, there's all these tools and services we could be using remotely, digitally, that do not need to be in our immediate vicinity, that could be improving the work of our organization. And I think that's what saw a lot of interest in Pond as we got started. I happened to just quit my job 5 days before the pandemic started, and that was when got started building and deciding what Pond would be. So it was kind of serendipitous, but I do think that all of the realities faced during the pandemic have helped people realize the importance of technology, the importance of looking outside of your immediate surroundings for solutions, and an interest in a platform that can meet that need.
Okay, I'm gonna dissect that response in many different ways, but before we get there as well, I'm curious to know about the name Pond. How did you come up with it?
Yeah, we had a different name originally. I quit when I was quitting and kind of in the planning stages, I had like the perfect name. I was convinced. And then some other company had already taken it. And then I was like, oh, okay. So then I went through this exercise of like writing 100 different options down. A lot were taken, a lot were just bad. We ended up going with something that I thought was good, but that was before I really knew anything about branding or marketing. And we called the original company Empower Us. And it like kind of makes me cringe to say it today. It was like the letter M, and then there was another capital, and it was all one word. And it was hard to say, and people couldn't remember it. And so it was just like all these problems. And for our first iteration of the platform, we had used the name, and then kind of went through this major pivot, like redesign, deciding if we were still going to exist to do something next. And when we came out of that with a new prototype we were testing, and we didn't really have a new name for what we wanted to do next, but we had identified something we thought was working and getting good traction, we actually engaged a firm that a friend of mine works at to help us with branding and like a full brand strategy. And so Pond was actually one of their suggestions was Big Pond out of like 10. And our team just kind of honed in on that. And the more we talked about it, like, this makes so much sense, but can we just call it Pond? And the more and more they're like, oh, there's no one else really called this. And I really love this word. And it's a single word. It's simple. It's easy to remember. And it translates so much of what we both see today and want to see in the future of like, the sector is such an ecosystem. It's so localized, but it could be even more, it could thrive even more if we can connect it more broadly in a really organic way, and something we need to make the space feel comfortable and, just in your backyard and not intimidating, because the things people are doing for their organizations so often are really intimidating. And like the internet at large is really intimidating, where people just turn to Google to find their answers. And people don't trust it. We're like, we need to bring this home, like bring it to something that is manageable. No matter where you are, you can see all the edges of Pond, like that sort of vibe. And the more and more we just played around with it, we loved it. And as we put it out there and people started engaging with us, it was just so cool to see how they would put the name into their own language. So they would say something like, oh, well, I'm ready to jump in. And that sort of like how it lends itself to speaking in metaphor is so powerful, because it's really not only has someone heard the name, they've actually translated it into action that they're going to take that is brand aligned. Like that's a really unique thing that so many companies don't have with their naming. And so we've just continued to fall in love with it more and more. And one other really nerdy, like linguistic thing about Pond is, even though it's only a 4-letter single syllable word, when you say it, everybody really elongates and pauses on the O. So it's hard to say the word quickly. You have to say pond. It's not quick. And so where no matter where it sits in the sentence, people kind of pause on it and reflect. And that is something that I, as a someone who loves etymology and language, I really nerd out on and love when I see that in action.
There's almost like an adoption to where it becomes almost a verb, right? Like Google starts as a noun, becomes a verb almost, or at least it's a wording around it. Like I like the idea of jumping in, of something organic, something local, something, people understand. It's simple. It's not overly complicated. I mean, there's a lot of beautiful visionary visions and images that I can think of when I think of it as well. And I love the idea of, frog, local, organic, again. Anything to do with the big fish, small pond?
That was definitely where, so like the agency we were working with, when they put Big Pond forward, it was sort of a play on that, like big fish, small pond, saying like everyone's just a fish in a big pond. So there's like some element of that, but we kind of moved away from calling it Big Pond or the pond or anything like that, just keeping it really simple. But that's definitely like a place people take it when they ask about it or talk about it, which is, again, when people make it their own, that's really powerful. I mean, in branding, you always have a spectrum, just when it comes to names, where it can be completely abstract, like Google, like you said, where you're kind of like creating a new word or using a word in a different way, like Slack. I'm going to Slack you. That's never existed before as a transitive verb. And then on the other end, you have like hyper literal, right? It'd be like the impact marketplace or something like that, where it's just like brick to forehead, totally literal. And then we're kind of in that in-between territory where it's not an abstract concept or made up word, but it's not too literal. It's more like emotional. And because it lends itself to the like associated language that kind of builds this like brand book of words that people start using in association with the platform, which is, like you said, it's just really cool to see that take shape in action.
Absolutely. So going then to the educating and marketing Pond, as you're breaking new grounds, as you're introducing it, how do you overcome that challenge? What are the main obstacles in your way, and how do you overcome those obstacles?
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason that people are excited about Pond, particularly on the vendor side of the marketplace, is that the sector is incredibly fragmented and localized. And so it going to market is actually the single biggest challenge. You could have the best product in the world that every nonprofit needs to know about, and it's really, really hard to get to them. You can try to run the conference circuit and be in a million different places. It's expensive, it's time consuming, but expensive both from like booking a space, but also like creating the materials and all these things. And that's really how a lot of vendors in the space have gone to market historically. You can try to use online advertising, but there's already a lot of distrust in the space where that is hard to gain a lot of traction with. And so really we are kind of trying to solve that go-to-market challenge for vendors. If we can aggregate the needs that are out there and connect people with the solutions that make sense when they have them, wow, that's a really efficient way to go to market for other vendors. But we have that hurdle initially. And so what we've done, which was part of just starting this during the pandemic, was I got really, really involved in my own LinkedIn. And it was just a way for me to share as I started doing some of my own podcast interviews or conversations I was having or things I was learning. I just loved sharing that info with people, insight on what my startup and entrepreneur journey has been like, my own mental health journey, like all these different things that I felt were important to me. And I love writing, and decided to put those things to work and just try to really invest in posting on LinkedIn. And it generated a ton of interest in me and what I was doing. And that has driven over 90% of the people joining Pond are coming from LinkedIn, or people sharing what I posted on LinkedIn and tapping into networks of organizations. And I'd say that's the second biggest one, is like building relationships with people in all different parts of the country, plugged into different like nonprofit communities and ecosystems, has been also super helpful in getting the word out within their space, or tapping into new circles of nonprofit leaders and professionals. But it takes time. It's like someone said, the space moves at the speed of trust, and that is so true. You just really got to put in the reps. And that's why I think LinkedIn has been so effective, because it's not just like a splashy post and whatever. It's like, I'm usually posting 5 to 6 days a week and about everything, work related, personal, any like specifically to Pond, general work thoughts, like just the whole spectrum, so that people start to really understand you as a person, and it builds a lot of trust. And I think trust is the single biggest hurdle in the go-to-market motion in this space to meet the right potential customers.
Yeah, I totally agree. Trust number one. So that was from the vendor side. What about breaking barriers on the nonprofit side? How do you advertise and inform nonprofits?
Oh, sorry. That was entirely for the nonprofit side. They are usually, with marketplaces, you have a harder side when you always have this chicken and egg issue. And the nonprofit side is absolutely the hard one. And so that's where LinkedIn has been effective, and tapping into those networks organizations has been effective, and just relationship building one by one. It's not super efficient, but it's really valuable, and you really get to know people's needs at a deeper level, and then build that trust so that they start to share with their own communities. On the vendor side, honestly, it has been, initially it was just a lot of like getting intros and outbounds from me as I identified buckets of need areas where we needed more vendors. And so I was just kind of like hustling salesperson mode. But it really turned a corner a few months ago, where we do very little outbound to specific vendors, and we get typically like 2 to 3 new vendors signing up a day for Pond exclusively inbound from word of mouth, or also seeing us on LinkedIn. So that has been, which makes sense. Like I said, you usually have a hard and an easier side in a marketplace. And that has been somewhat of the easier side of just getting people engaged. But the most effective thing to get vendors is just having more nonprofit members, right? Their motivations are pretty simple. They just want to have more opportunities to meet with customers that are posting needs in their category. On the nonprofit side, the things that have been most critical to them have been, they really like having high value content, because I just think there's a real lack for good professional development in this space. And so we host a ton of webinars and discussions and do this all in a live interactive way on the platform. And that lends itself to the other piece that people really want is they want to be doing this in community. They want to have peers that they see using the platform or that they can connect with. And they also really want this to be something they control. It's not they're going to a conference and they just sit through like the sessions and hear from the sponsors that the person throwing it wants them to talk to. Like they're in control. They decide whenever they connect with someone. They get to talk with people before they get their email. Like all these things that they value and find control is super important.
Yeah, I associate LinkedIn with the vendor side only because I'm pretty sure that's how I learned about Pond. Was a post of yours
Yeah.
or a colleague where it's like, have you joined Pond yet? And checking it out, it seemed like a really cool platform. I think I joined early on, so it was a bit quieter than it is now. I'm hearing a lot more noise about Pond and much more traction, I would say. So that's fantastic. So let's say then a nonprofit learns about Pond for the first time. They go to the website. What do they normally need to do besides register? What are they expecting to see, and or how do they interact with Pond?
Yeah, I mean, right now, the most people come to the platform to attend one of these live discussions and live virtual events that we host as a starting point, right? So we hosted weekly sessions starting in January. We brought them all like directly onto the platform in July for a series of 6 conversations on disrupting philanthropy. Everything from being more community centric in your fundraising, moving more funding to Black founded organizations, practicing trust philanthropy, a lot of really powerful topics that a lot of people describe as bold, and they're not seeing a lot of people in the space engaging in these conversations. And just in the month of July, we doubled the number of people on the platform, almost entirely wanting to check out those discussions and that content. So from there, it's like now you've engaged in the platform, you've done the initial steps of setting up your account. And so when you have a need, I'm looking for a specific type of consultant, or we have an issue with a tech platform we use, then you can create a project. It works a lot like Angie's List. This is the comparison that I've found resonates with the audience the most. Create a project, answer a couple questions about your needs, your budget, your timeline, et cetera, the category it falls into. And then we kind of match that with vendors on the platform that focus on that specific area. People can see the messages that come in from potential vendors that offer to connect and share what they do, check out their profile, see other users that are customers of that vendor, and do some of that initial research. And then they're able to meet with them through Pond to assess if they like what they're offering. And then we help them if they need to get another reference or need some help pitching this to their board. Like we've got all those other resources for them. And so that's how you can use it from the moving from engaging in the content, being part of the community. Then I'm actually the core marketplace function of discovering and selecting a vendor that I need. You also are building up credits on the platform as you're using it. So you meet with someone, you give us some feedback, you join a special session that has a credit bonus. You now probably have a few $100s that when you make your purchase with Pond, we actually just give a cash rebate to the organization where you can kind of cash out your credits on the platform too.
In terms of we'll get to the credits in a second because that's really interesting. I don't hear that very often about a platform offering you credits to use it and then actually giving you some kind of discount. But before we get to that, in terms of the services or projects that a nonprofit can ask for, I mean, I know, of course, the CRM side of things, but that's just a small facet of the many other services. What other popular ones do you see on Pond?
Yeah, that's always a popular one, I think, just because a lot of people are either at smaller organizations that need their first CRM or database and they've just been using spreadsheets or something beforehand, or in a legacy system that people are kind of fed up with. So those tend to be the two sources of that need. But honestly, we have about 100 categories on the platform, and we are seeing like a huge spectrum. Better platforms to manage volunteers has been a really popular one. People with like specific strategy projects that they need help with, and they're looking for kind of a consultant project manager for those things has come up several times. Different kinds of fundraising, like obviously CRMs can be used for fundraising too, but for managing events or specific like kinds of fundraisers has been big. Grants, seeking grant writers is huge. That's always a space where, especially organizations that maybe don't have a full-time grant writer yet, and it's just sort of an extra part of someone's job, finding a part-time outsourced grant writer can be really effective. So those are some of the popular ones. But like I said, it really runs the gambit, like a payroll system, a board consultant, like wanting to do a DEI project. Like we've seen it all.
So it's not just a platform or a project, a technology rather. It could be also for advice.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have a number of consultants and service providers that use the platform as well. I think we started off like a year and a half ago. We're very focused on software more exclusively, and just came to appreciate that it is never just the tool, right? Like it's never fully achieving the outcome that people are seeking. Like there needs to be some kind of training or some consulting element. And as we brought that in, realized like, oh, there are a lot of folks that have these needs on an ongoing basis in these other services, most of which are delivered digitally or remotely and are still tech based. But it is like a human involved that they're in need of as opposed to a specific product. And we found that it's kind of our duty, if ultimately we're trying to help people achieve more impact, we needed to have a broader offering that encompassed those core needs of nonprofit leaders.
And then going then back to credit. So you actually give a discount of some kind based on how much a nonprofit or a vendor interacts with this platform. You actually can build credit and then apply that credit. What made you come up with that concept? Because I haven't, it's not a very popular one.
Yeah, I mean, when I alluded to this earlier with our original name, we started a kind of initial platform, launched it, got no traction. We're trying to figure out what to do next. And it was much more like a Yelp where it was just a list of products and people could leave reviews. And it was just not really meeting the core need we found because people didn't necessarily know what they were looking for. And they also didn't have the time to go like hunting through all these listings. And through iterating on a few different ideas, we were like, well, let's flip this around. Let's stop making the nonprofit leader be the shopper. What if they kind of flip the marketplace around and say, no, I'm going to just post my need or problem I'm facing, and can vendors come to me through the platform if they have the relevant solution? And when we talked about that on the vendor side, they were like, oh yeah, we often pay per lead on some other software review sites. And that's like a model they were used to. And when we thought about that, we're like, well, that feels kind of gross. Like, it feels like we're then just monetizing that, and it's someone's time and they're sharing their feedback and input. Well, could that just be a core part of the platform where when people are doing that, we reward them because that's when we make money, but it's really their time? And can there be like kind of a mutual benefit where they engage, they build up credits through the system, and then when they make purchases, they actually get the benefit of all of the time and feedback they contributed? And it was a really interesting selling point, like you said, for people when they started, were like, I've never really felt my time valued in this way. Like, this is really cool that when you ask me to do something, I'm getting something in return. And then I get to use that to lower what is often such a big hurdle for organizations, which is the expense of acquiring new vendors.
It's cute that you in your FAQ on your website, the question is, is this really? It sounds too good to be true. Is it really true? And you're like, yeah, it's really true. This is how we work. This is how we we can make a living. Making sure we can provide this service and stay afloat, provide value, and yet still give something back in return. I think it's a lovely financial model or revenue model.
Yeah, and it was important for us to also not just have like a list of discounts, which I think is what oftentimes people do, have like a coupon booklet. And we're like, if someone wants to offer a nonprofit discount, great. Like, I obviously don't want to stop them. Like definitely give them the best deal they can. But also, where our view is like, what if you got rewarded for the time you were spending searching and engaging, and then you just got to apply that as you wish? It's not just like hunting out the best discount. This is like something you earned, and now you get to apply it wherever the biggest need is.
In terms of providers and vendors, is there like a vetting process? Is there a qualification they have to go through to be able to be on the platform? Or is it just as long as you can provide any kind of service, you're welcome to join?
Yeah, so there is getting started. There, it's kind of self-service through the platform to get going. But we connect with the vendors that join and learn more about what they offer. Also, just so that we can be kind of matching with the right projects that are listed on the platform. And then it's where we're able to learn about them and do some more kind of validation and verification. And then, we also have this kind of peer review system once you get started, where as people are meeting with vendors, they review those interactions, making sure it kind of keeps the system healthy, where you're able to spot any bad actors or bad eggs in the mix in both directions. Like vendors can also flag if they had a bad interaction with a nonprofit. It's just like, on Airbnb or Uber, where there's that two-way review system as people interact in the marketplace. And so we definitely rely upon that to get good feedback, and focus on adding more ways for nonprofits to share their own positive experiences and positive outcomes with the vendors they're using. And so that'll be a new feature on the platform in the coming weeks as well.
When a nonprofit offers or posts a project and they get a whole bunch of responses, do you have any recommendations for how to sift through, let's say they get a dozen applicants, how does one go about going through all of them? Is there like a process or an outline that they can follow that you recommend?
Yeah, it's a good question. We haven't come across this a ton where someone's been like, I've got too many requests. Like, I think there's a good amount of information because they're putting like helpful information out there to begin with. And then they are able to check out more information within the provider profile, seeing what they shared in their message. Like, there's a lot of indicators on if this feels like a good fit or a worthy conversation, which is a big benefit of the platform, right? Is you're not just like randomly searching online and reaching out to a million people. It's streamlining it all and doing some of that initial kind of like, you both need to opt into this conversation. A lot of people have compared it to a dating app. And it's sort of like, I put out a need, you've said you meet it, I get to check out your response and go from there. So in general, I think that is helpful in limiting. It's not just like every vendor reaches out to me. It's pretty specific because I've been specific with what I asked for. And that'll also be like my first piece of advice to people is the more specific you can be in your requests or problems that you're surfacing, you're going to get better outreach from vendors. Because the truth is that most vendors also don't want to have conversations that are relevant to them, so that's like a big benefit for them using the platform too, is it helps them optimize the time they're spending talking with potential customers. And that is better for everyone, right? To just be making those connections in the right place. I think in terms of like making those decisions when you might have a few different options, one thing that we hear a ton that is important to nonprofits is that they want to make sure their vendors are values aligned. And so that was one thing that we've did. Really, one of the first things we did was whenever a vendor joins, they can also put in their profile, we are a women-owned business or a Black-owned business, LGBT founded company, like whatever their own like diversity identity that they have, veteran-owned business, they can share all that there. Which a lot of people in the nonprofit space, it's really important to them to make sure that they're meeting with some diverse founders and owners of the businesses that they're supporting. And then also it's just like you put out there what you needed. Like, don't be afraid to look at something and be like, oh, this just doesn't sound right. And that's easier to do when you actually have a lot of options. So I think that all has contributed to being pretty smooth for people.
And then in market growth, like I've noticed, like when I joined, I think it was still relatively new. And you have that initial problem where also like a dating app where you need to make sure you have enough boys and girls and partners and matching in order to get some kind of traction. But I know that, or at least I hear of, that Pond has really been doing really successful recently and quite a bit of growth. Can you speak a bit about that? And what was the instigator of that kind of growth?
So I mentioned that we started and this just might be interesting for folks from like a marketing perspective. We are very experimental with our marketing. We like try something out, assess it. Did it work? Do more of it, do less of this, move on to something else. And one thing that like I said, two things that we really wanted to try were hosting webinars because we did a survey of our members in the fall, and we got about 50 responses, and 95% of them said that they had attended a non-mandatory professional webinar in the last 6 months. We're like, oh, this audience really loves this type of content. So let's start we have a great network. So let's start like hosting these conversations and inviting people in. And we're like, oh, but we need a way to get them to people. So we really need a good newsletter first. So we worked on a newsletter that we got going to recap like things happening in the sector, happening on Pond, good resources, et cetera. And so we started the weekly newsletter in December, and a month in started promoting the webinars that we were hosting publicly on LinkedIn, kind of broadcasting YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook. And then we're just seeing like hundreds of people join them, thousands of people viewing them over several months. And so that's when we made the decision to move the kind of like webinar interactive experience into the platform as part of it. We launched that in early July for the July series. And that's where we had about 450 members using the platform before July. And by the end of July, we were up to 900. So we literally doubled just the nonprofit user base from making that interactive content and discussion forum a core part of the platform. And so that is something where we now have a wider audience, and we need to figure out how to like cater to their breadth of needs, right? So if they came in for webinars, we need to make sure that they're getting to the right next session, what makes sense to them, making sure that they know the other things that Pond can help with and other ways you can use it. But that's the first hurdle, getting them there. And then you've got that user experience thing to optimize and continue engaging and delivering value. But it's completely free for people. It is, when you use it, you earn money and build credit. So we've really tried to make it accessible, no brainer, just purely helpful, and continuing to react to where we see those things and keep getting better.
And I believe on August 16th of this year, you're actually doing some kind of camp, this Camp Impact. I guess that's close to or part of a type of seminar series. What is that about exactly?
Yeah, so Camp Impact, it's a series of virtual events, one a week for 4 weeks, where we are, now that we have this on-platform streaming capability, we're like, okay, let's go deep and specific on core topics that we're seeing the most questions and projects around, and doing a couple things within a really efficient session. Can we do a workshop that is focused on equity and equity centered around that topic? So when we're talking about volunteering, successful volunteering goes hand in hand with more inclusive and equitable volunteer programs. When we're talking about events, we want to talk about how to make them more community centric, and not just money making, but both going hand in hand, meeting your community's needs and raising lots of money. And so that's how we wanted to kick off every one of these sessions, these deep dives. And then the second half is just really focused on success. And what we mean by success, which is different for every organization, can we showcase where other nonprofit leaders have faced a challenge with their volunteering, with their marketing, with their grant writing, and what did they do about it? What were the tools they used, and how did they maximize those tools and services, and what are the outcomes they achieved, and advice they'd give to other folks in the space? So there's this workshop and showcase element where customers from multiple vendors on Pond will share their stories in a sequence and go through that Q&A to learn about their best practices, strategies, and feedback. And so it is all peer-driven and really accessible and relatable to the audience on Pond. And so we've done a number of things that are super unique in the space, and this is completely free. These are sessions, like I said, all led by their peers, and everything is with an equity lens, which we know is super important to the audience and something that we want to continue to really pound the drum on in everything we do. And so that series is, like you said, August 16th for 4 weeks, every Tuesday at noon Eastern, open to the public. Anyone can join. Really unique platform for that kind of learning. And then the other piece of it is any of those products in that category where there are vendors on Pond in volunteering, for example, where they have volunteer management platforms. In the following days, we'll also host group demos that if you want to double click and learn more specifically about the product, you can join completely anonymously. So you avoid, if you don't like that awkward one-on-one, but you want to learn about the platform, or you want to hear the questions your peers ask, and you don't want people getting your email, that's like exactly what Pond is here for.
I mean, I've been holding my feedback, but I'm a big advocate of Pond in the sense of there's so much value that you're bringing to the nonprofit space and so many different facets of it. I'm impressed and a fan, let's call it. And what's cute is that
Uh-huh.
even though you're maybe the first to market, there's a lot of familiarity with what you're offering, right? We mentioned stuff like Google, Angie's List, Airbnb, Uber, dating apps, marketplaces. Like these are familiar concepts that you've now wrapped up together in this beautiful little bow, and it's specifically for nonprofits. And it's wonderful to see it really taking shape and growing. So I want to thank you for creating it.
Uh, Thank you. It's been cool. And one thing I'll mention too, because it comes up, I have a lot of great conversations like that where people have positive things to say, and then I have conversations where sometimes I get feedback, which I just describe as less positive. But all feedback is a gift. So if anyone has things good or bad to say about what we're doing, we want to hear it because it's a gift. But I have certainly had a number of people that have questioned me specifically and been like, oh, well, you haven't worked at a nonprofit. So like, why are you the person doing this? And I think a lot about that. And I try to be really intentional of never personally, individually, Mitch, as a person, coming out and saying, like, this is what you need to do. Let me tell you how you should run your nonprofit. I absolutely never do that. It is all about giving other people a stage and a mic and a camera for their experience, their voice, and making sure we're getting lots of expertise from across the sector, getting it out there and accessible and well organized for people. And it has been, I think there's a lot of value coming into a space where you have a passion for it. So you're going to do the work, which that's also part of my answer to people is like, well, I did it, this is something that's needed and it wasn't happening and someone needed to do it. And the other piece is that there's a lot of value in not ever presuming you know the answer, right? So always having to ask people that in the day-to-day work while having an outside perspective. And I think we'll keep getting better at that, but that's something we like constantly have to remind ourselves is we aren't biased by our one experience or by aren't so arrogant to think like, oh, well, I've worked at a nonprofit before, so I know how every nonprofit works and how the whole sector works. Like that's not true either. And I think it's actually better to be a little bit removed and just be really good at asking questions and talking to people and incorporating their feedback and experiences into a product and a platform for them. And I try to really hold on to the value of that as a bit of an outsider.
There's an expression that says something to the effect of if somebody's not criticizing your dream, you're not dreaming big enough. I think that has some truth to it here. And I know that it was Seth Godin, I believe, that said some of your approach for delivering and marketing something is here, telling the market, here, I built this, I hope you like it. And then sitting back and then just
Yeah.
absorbing it and then getting that feedback and then improving it as time goes on.
Yeah.
So what's in the short-term vision for Pond? Where would you like to see Pond in the next few years?
A few years. That's not very short term. No, I mean like short term. I'm like, what's happening next week? Things are obviously moving quickly, but no, I mean, I am so excited at like the pace of progress on what we're able to bring about and incorporate into the product, into our content. The team is just fantastic and like really firing on all cylinders, which is really fun to oversee. I think some of the core areas I would love to see, at a high level, I just would love Pond to be that standard, like where everyone go first stop, like, let me check on Pond. Like, yeah, it's a no brainer. Anyone working in the nonprofit space should be here, plugged into this. They get a ton of value out of it. And this is the place to go. Like that sort of standard place for people to come and really ubiquitous platform for all the tools and resources that are dedicated to the space. That also involves for any company that's wanting to serve the nonprofit sector, having a real turnkey channel for them to turn to. That's like, here's how you connect with the right organizations, even coaching and training people on serving nonprofits well, like being that positive intermediary in both directions, I think is super exciting. I think there's tons of ways we can, from a big vision perspective, like having standard pricing for everything that Pond could even like moderate to make sure no one's getting taken advantage of. You can actually pay for things through Pond and pay for things in like packages across the services you're using at your organization. You can actually just get grant funding for what you need directly through the platform, because we have a standard process where you've sort of qualified your need and connected with a vetted and validated vendor to meet it. And we know other members of the platform have achieved X outcome with it. So no brainer for a funder to meet that need with the funds that you need. So there's tons of opportunity to make this like that true kind of impact economy platform that's driving an amazing amount of transparency and efficiency in how we're creating impact with the sector.
Yeah, so if it isn't already obvious, I highly recommend nonprofits check out the platform. So actually, speaking of which, where can they find more about you and more about the platform?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, joinpond.com is the place to see everything happening on the site. And like I said, it takes a few seconds to get going as a nonprofit user, and encourage you to check everything out there. I'm super, super active on LinkedIn, as I mentioned. So you can find me there. You search for Mitch Stein Pond, you will find me. And so love to connect with people there and chat with anyone who has questions. And, I mean, my email is also open to everyone. It's mitch@joinpond.com. So happy to connect directly there if that's easier too.
Mitch, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
All right, folks, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again next time for Agents of Nonprofit.